Welcome, everybody, to Write Out Loud, the podcast all about storytelling, writing, authorship, creativity, just oozing that creativity that we all lust for every day, right?
Yes.
I am, of course, Matt Cassim. I'm here with the brilliant, stunning, innovative, wondrous, beautiful, and amazing, talented Christina.
Ooh, innovative. I like that one. That one fits. I like that.
Yes, it does. Well, they all fit, really, but you know, I like when you get excited about one of them that I come up with. That's always good. So this week we're talking about point of view, and by that we mean many stories are written in different points of view. You have third person, you have first person, you have weird hybrids. It's my own judgment, but you know, we're going to talk about point of view and kind of what that brings to the table and what really sparked this. I have a blog post here that I want to just kind of quickly share. And so the blog post is by Manton Reece, and he says in his post, a small, probably unfair book rant. When I start a fantasy book and discover it's written in first person, I groan a little. It takes a unique story and a very good author to pull it off. Thinking of Robin Hobb. Even great books would be a little better in third person with multiple perspectives. So I sent that to you and was just like, this is kind of interesting, right? I think it's a really fascinating take. So let's talk about it. And well, here we are.
Yes. And in fact, when you sent that to me, I'm like, this is the topic. This is what we need to talk about. I actually have a lot of thoughts on choosing point of view, why you should, why you shouldn't, some other points of view that I don't think are widely used enough in fiction, but according to Jane Friedman, right now they're all the rage, which I'm not actually seeing, not in my clients, nor am I seeing it. Or I should say, I should qualify that with, I'm not seeing it more in my clients. Like the clients that I see it from, I tend to see it. Deep point of view, which is technically third person, but it's from one character's point of view.
Okay.
So some people call it limited third person, but from industry that I have worked with, we call it deep point of view. And that's because you actually don't know that you're reading deep point of view, that you're reading, it's technically a first person account, but told in third person. And Jane Friedman said that this is a new trend. I don't know how it became a new trend because when I started working with authors decades ago, one of the authors that I worked with, Suzanne Brockman, is absolutely the best at it. Genius, because at that time, I was not an editor. I was coming off of book selling and worked with her on marketing and other business aspects. But we were having a discussion in her kitchen and we were talking about the book she had just written. And of course, I had read it, person number 3 to have read it because her mother and her husband are person 1 and 2. And we were discussing something and I made a comment and she goes, ooh, no. And she said, no, we're seeing it from X character, his point of view, and he is making a judgment of these 2 other people that he's seeing across the room. And I'm like, mind blown, because as soon as I understood she was writing it from one character's point of view, because I wasn't reading into it. I'm a reader at that point. I'm not an editor or, any of the above. it clicked with me that, wow, she was using this point of view to keep secrets, to tell a certain side of the story a certain way. And perhaps, I'm not going to use the word mislead because that's not what she was doing, but she was diverting attention so that people would think one way or another. And it was genius to me. It was absolutely genius. So the fact that Jane Friedman is now saying it's the trend, I think it was a trend before, but there are very few authors that do it so well, like Suze.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping sometime we can get Suze on to talk about deep point of view more than we're going to talk about it here today. But yeah, she is an absolute genius at it. Genius. The interesting thing also with Jane Friedman's comments, when I followed the blog posts attached with those comments, they weren't written by her. They were written by somebody else. So it's interesting that she was taking, and not that you can't do that, but,
Sure.
taking someone else's thoughts on it. So when you sent me that post and then I had just seen that Jane Friedman thing, I thought this was a perfect way to talk about the different points of view. Point of view that you choose is important. And what are some of the things that are unique about the different points of view?
Yeah. So I think as we talk about it, right, we think about first person and third person.
Yes.
As sort of the broad strokes, right? Those are the kind of the top level of options, maybe.
Yes.
And there's some sub sects of that, I guess, where there's like third person limited, first person limited. Like there's different ways to refer to that based on how you approach it, I guess. But to me, when I look at point of view, I think Suze is right. I think it's a way that you have to think about how you're going to tell the story and what you want your readers to be able to know, both in the moment and ahead of time.
Yes.
And whether you want to keep secrets from just the characters or do you want to keep secrets from the reader and let them kind of figure it out along with the characters. So it all just depends on kind of your goal, I guess, right?
Yeah. I actually think that is the most important question you need to ask when deciding what point of view. Let me backtrack for a second too, because here's the other thing is when you are deciding what point of view, certainly you want to lean to your strengths. If you don't think you can write third person and your natural voice is first person, then obviously you should choose first person. If you are someone who is trying out different points of view, different voices, I do think you should give some of these a thought and, quite frankly, look up deep point of view and see if that's something that you can do. Because I think some of the most successful and the most engaging for the reader, and by engaging, I mean that book that plays like a movie in your head and you're so caught up in it that like you forget the world around you. Those for me tend to be that third person and even further third person, deep point of view. But that's not to say that first person isn't also great in its own way, which one of the authors that I read that she had written in the past third person, and she was writing something brand new. She had been with traditional publishers and self-published the first book in the series, and she absolutely used first person, but with a purpose. So this wasn't just I've been writing in third person and I haven't found success. She definitely was mid to top list author. I'm not actually sure exactly where she fell other than she was successful. I would consider her successful and a very good writer. And when she released this book in first person, when I first heard that she had done this, I thought to myself, okay, is this a question of, is she trying to follow a trend? Because at that time, romance was just starting to trend towards first person. It is absolutely first person now. It's dominated by first person romances. That's not to say someone who writes in third isn't finding success. They are.
Let me ask a question about that. Do you think the first person dominating that specific genre, do you feel like that's because they've maybe discovered that it's more intimate that way?
I think that's a possibility, but I actually think it's more trend related versus like the readers are like, oh my God, this feels so intimate to me. Because there are still some hugely successful authors that write in third.
Sure.
So I think if they were feeling that way, these authors would start writing in first person. I think there is an element to that. Yes, absolutely. Specifically for the romance genre, because you get inside their heads. But remember that in third person deep point of view, you are also directly inside somebody's head. You just don't necessarily hear the I. You're in third person. So but anyway, back to this author, because this is what blew me away. I read it thinking, oh, okay, she's following the trend. But what she ended up doing was using it as a literary device in order to keep like a big surprise, a big secret revealed. When it's later revealed, you're like, oh my God, that's right. We were only seeing it from this person's point of view. And finally, when we find out the secret, and to me, that was amazing because that was a device. So this author sat down and went, if I write this in first person, I can keep some secrets.
Yeah.
I can keep some suspense. I can keep some angst going on here and other feelings. So I think whatever point of view you decide to write in, whether it is your natural voice or not, to use it as that literary device. Use it to further tell the story. One of my favorite authors writes both in first person and third person in the same book.
Okay.
And by literary standards, this is a no-no. This is breaking rules. Normally for me, it would also be because it's like, oh my God, we're head hopping. But it works for her voice. It really works for her voice. And I think sometimes even if I've read one of her books that are one of her early works, she tried writing in third person, and I haven't gotten to those books yet.
You're like, well, those are
I don't know. I've got them all, and I think someday I'll probably read them. But right now, what draws me in is her first person, and then she started adding the third person point of view from the male perspective. And someone asked her once, and I don't know if this is true or not. But she said she can get into the heroine's head because she's female and she knows how to write that first person. And third person, she's not male. That comes out as third person. So it's interesting that way because she's successful. Extremely successful. I mean, New York Times bestseller and all that. And Hybrid publishes her own. I think she's at a couple traditional publishers.
But doing good work.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. So if we assume that maybe you, dear listener, are not too familiar with what this sounds like or what this looks like, right? I looked up a couple of quick definitions because there is one I forgot to talk about, which is second person.
I don't even know if I know what that is.
First person, narrator uses the pronoun I, right? Pretty straightforward. I went to this school. Here I am. They looked at me, blah, blah, blah. It does say the narrator can also use us and other pronouns such as you, them, or it, but the reader stays in the narrator's head and knows only what the narrator knows.
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That's what I was talking about before with that other author and keeping secrets. So that's one that if you want to hide things from your reader, that's a great one to use.
Okay. Yeah. Or and even again, hiding from the characters, right? Like because this character only knows what they know and might be easy to keep them in the dark. Second person perspective. The reader is the viewpoint character and the story is happening to them. So the narrator uses you to describe the reader's reactions, thoughts, and background. This POV is much less popular, and because it can be awkward to write long prose fiction in second person, it can force the reader to make decisions they might disagree with. So second person is often used in mediums where the reader can make active decisions like video games, tabletop RPGs.
Oh, yeah, I see what they're going with that.
Yeah, so they're saying you walk into a barn and you see that this is happening, and what do? You grab a table leg and hit somebody.
Yeah.
No, yeah. I don't want to hit somebody. Yeah. Third person. Probably the most popular usually in stories, I guess. I would say. I don't know. My guess.
Yeah. Today, I would think it's almost more of a toss-up if you're talking just fiction in general, all genres. 50-50. It would be a toss-up. I think getting into the different subgenres, like I said right now, I believe romance is kind of leaning more towards first person than third person these days. But that doesn't mean that someone can't write a stellar third person.
Sure.
And be successful.
Sure. So here the author narrates the story from an outside perspective using pronouns like he, she, and they, or referring to characters by name. There are 3 different approaches to third person point of view. Third person omniscient, third person limited, and third person objective. So in third person omniscient, the narrator has an all-knowing perspective and can enter the minds of any character they want. The narrator can move from character to character to show how each one contributes to the plot and can give the reader their own opinions and observations as well as those of the characters. And that is, by the way, from Kindlepreneur and Grammar. It's a mix because it's kind of a summary of all of these.
Yeah.
Again, just different ways of kind of breaking down the character and the way that the story is told, the voice with which that story is told. Yeah. So you can think back to some of your favorite stories. We just really spent some time looking at some stories over the weekend. And most of the ones that I read were in third person. And then there was a couple that I read that were kind of dancing in that first person a little bit as well. So
yeah. I think one of the things too that I want to talk about is first person can be difficult to write well. The reason I say that is because sometimes I think the writer can get a little lazy with it, not using it as a literary device. There can be a lot of head info dumping is what I mean. We're in the narrator's head so much and it's I this and I that and I think this and I think that it can be an info dump of stuff. And you always want to remember that showing is better than telling. And first person lends so much to telling that it can be, I think, a little more problematic than, say, third person, because at least in third person, the writer has removed themselves from the narrator a little bit. And you don't get so much of that info dump. Like I said, there are positive and negatives to each one. And I think number one is you definitely have to look at what your natural voice leans towards.
Sure.
And number two, look for what literary devices can you use in those points of view. How do you keep secrets? How do you tell the story in the most effective way, keeping some secrets as you go? First person, I think if you're telling the story from solely one person's point of view, think about why you're telling that story. It has to be a more personal story. It has to be something that's like a journey of growth or, a trauma-based, like here I am and learning and so on and so forth. So think about what the themes of your story are and what are the best ways in order to tell that. I think a lot of times when a new writer sits down, they don't think out which one am I best at. They just kind of sit down and allow themselves to write, or not my favorite thing, but it's the trend to write in first person, so let me write in first person.
Sure.
Really, when their natural voice would be a third person point of view. But it is, you have to be passionate about it. You have to be a little more natural at it. Not saying that if you're a more natural first person, that doesn't mean you can't write third. I had a client who started writing in first person and they said they wanted to try third. And I suggested deep point of view and I sent them the materials that I had. And they ended up writing a great, great story. So I think sometimes you don't actually know what your natural voice is until you actually start writing.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting too. I remember writing growing up and getting into stories, and I would typically lean towards third person perspective, whether it was, again, omniscient or not, didn't matter, but would be a smattering of all of them. But I remember dabbling in first person for a couple of stories. And I think it was at the point where I was actually starting to get into like writing horror stories. And I remember writing one and it's like the first page, and I was terrible at this age. Like I was young. But I remember I think the first page was something like I'm a dark person, dark soul. I am a serial killer. And I remember as I'm writing this as the opening to the book, right? Like my mom reading and going, "No, you're not." And I was like, "It's not me. It's the character.
Yeah, it's the character.
Like, I'm not talking about me, the writer. Like I'm talking about this character, right?" But it's just funny because I think first person tends to throw people off that way, right?
Yeah,
because it can be hard. Sometimes you tend to think, "Am I supposed to am I identifying with this person? I don't know." Like you can have a little bit of struggle. So it does take some skill to write that.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of new writers that I speak with, not a lot of thought goes into what point of view should they be writing in.
Yeah.
Again, I think it's because their favorite author writes in this point of view or the trends are in that point of view. But I think that if you're really trying to lean in who you are as a writer, which I think is the most important thing that you can do in your writing career, because that's how you stand out. You stand out because it's a cliche for a reason. Only you can be you.
Yeah.
You're the only one that can write that. Back in the day, when vampires were a huge thing and everybody wanted to write vampires, some people were saying, "Oh, you can't write vampire. You can't write vampire." But there were some good authors that said, "No, I'm writing vampires and I'm putting my own twist on it." So not the Stephanie Meyer Twilight sparkly vampires.
They had their own. That's how you end up with sparkly.
Yes. They had their own style of vampire. And rightly so. And there's one of them still writing vampires today and continuing to do so. So I think if you know who you are as a writer and you know what you can do with point of view, I think that's half the battle right there.
Yeah, agreed. But there was an author I think you were working with, or at least had read, that was changing in between first and third person. So like if a chapter was from the protagonist's standpoint, they would go into first person, but when it jumped to anyone else, they went to third person.
That is Kristen Ashley.
Okay.
And that's who I was speaking about before, if I didn't say it. She writes first person for the female point of view and third person for the male point of view. That's right. And she, like I said, she makes it work. Yeah. She makes it work. I would not have been able to stay a fan had it not worked. Because when I get pulled out of a story, it's not fun. But no, I remain a fan of hers, and she is my case study for a lot of things. She's actually the one, I'm going to credit her with starting the first person point of view trend that we now see in romance that is mostly leaning that way. And in the beginning, there were no ebooks at that time, and she was submitting to New York, and they kept telling her, "Sorry, we do not publish first person for romance." No, seriously, this part of it I know is absolutely true. Because I was in the industry back then. So for her to say that she was rejected because of that. That's exactly why she would have been rejected. And then once self-publishing came out, she decided to go, okay, this is where I've got to go. And I think the idea that she was so strong in her own voice that I write romance in first person and I'm not going to change that for New York. And maybe she did, maybe she tried, and maybe those are the third person books that I haven't gotten to yet. But yeah, so that's why I say you can't discount breaking the rules if it fits your voice. If you can make it work, she somehow makes it work. 9 times out of 10, I'm taken away in her books and like, woo, this is great. I can't wait to read another one. There is a small percentage of some that I haven't liked, but she's written 100 books plus. So, what is it that, gosh, what's his name? His name just flew out of my head. Oh, I'll remember it when the podcast is over.
King.
Huh?
Stephen King.
No. He's not a fiction writer. He is a nonfiction writer that interviewed Britt Marling and I'm just not going to think of his name. Oh, Malcolm Gladwell. He actually said the percentage of people per 100, so just easy mathematics, that 20% is not going to like what you do. So if you're a hugely successful author and you're selling 1 billion copies, that means 20% of those 1 billion copies that are sold, people don't like it. So whatever the math is on that. So you've got 100 books out there. I do like more than their 20%, the 20% that they're saying that you dislike. I dislike fewer than that. I mean, there's a handful.
5%.
Yeah. There's a handful that in that case, I don't think it was the point of view that threw me. I think it was other things in the story that she was trying to do. So it's never been the point of view that has thrown me off. Like I said, with the exception of the third person. And I think that's just because her natural voice is first person. So those are more grabbing. They pull you in. They're her natural voice. So that's not to say she wasn't good at writing the third person. Like I said, I can't say because I didn't get far enough into any of them to know.
Yep.
Because I always went to this isn't catching me. Let me go to another one.
So let's talk a little bit more about this third person, just deep perspective or deep point of view.
Yeah.
Like, how does it differentiate between some of the other kind of definitions of that we've heard? And so let's talk about it.
I'm going to oversimplify and say that it is third person, but from a first person perspective.
Okay.
Meaning,
crinkling my face in
meaning
curiosity
that it is written in third person, but it is actually first person. So
okay, still crinkling.
It is, yes, it is one person's perspective, just like first person is. You are only seeing the scene from that point of view of that character.
Gotcha.
Okay. So it is first person, but
first person, but using like he.
Yeah.
He did. He went.
So it is from Matt's perspective, but me as the writer, narrator is calling him he. But we are only seeing it from his point of view. So it is his interpretation, his rose-colored glasses that are making judgments on the scene.
Okay.
So that's what I mean by that it can be used for some really great literary devices. Because once Sue's told me that it was from that person's perspective, I suddenly understood everything else that happened in the novel and how it was completely misinterpreted or, I mean, it was just, like I said, it was one of those moments in my reading lifetime that totally changed my perspective on reading, writing, editing. The other thing about deep point of view that's really great is you can have more than one character's perspective. You can have 2, 3, 4, 5. You can have as many as you want that work to an extent. At some point, you get too many characters' points of view, and then a reader gets lost. But I think that's why it's such a great point of view to write in. I think it's the most immersive that you can be within a book, that it's a point of view that lends itself to showing rather than telling. Because you can't tell when it's in the third person perspective that way. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you're describing it too, I think of it as a lot of the video games that I've played where you're literally driving your character around, right? So like think Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild. Like you don't see through their eyes, but you see their perspective. And you're walking them around and you're experiencing the world as they experience it. Again, without just literally looking through their eyes and seeing it that way. So, yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
In this case, it's the I person. I did this, I did that, because you're not seeing it that way. It's Matt did this, he did that.
Yeah.
You know, like I said, what I would really like to do sometime, stay tuned, maybe this will be a, end of season 3, beginning of season 4. We'll have to reach out to, we'll have to reach out to Suze and see if she'll come on and talk about the deep point of view perspective, because like I said, she to me is the genius at it. She really has crafted some of the best, books I've ever read with deep point of view. So rich in the writing that, again, it's like a movie playing out, but it's not letting you know everything. You are absolutely not. But that's actually good. I don't know that I would want to be, this is a personal thing. This is not an editor thing, but I personally am not a fan of the omniscient. I don't necessarily want to know every single thing that is going on, because where is the surprise in that? Where is the, I needed to figure that out for myself. Why didn't I figure those moments that you're so caught up, and then you're like, what did I just read? Page back and see where did I go wrong? Where did I get it wrong?
How did I miss that?
How did I miss that? Yeah. So we'll put a reach out to Suze and see if she'll come on and talk about it.
Yeah. Suzanne Brockman.
Yes.
Come on, join us. Yes. Jump right in. Let's talk about this. We would love to have you. All right. Well, very good. I look forward to that. I think that's going to be a great discussion. It'll be cool to hear her perspective, her point of view on that, and break it down a little bit further. So there you've got it. We talked about point of view and the various ways that you can leverage that in your writing to make it maybe a little different or a little more impactful, depending on what you're looking to do. Again, as you said, it kind of comes down to whatever your goal is in writing that story. How do you want to tell it? How do you want it to come across? What do you want to keep from the reader? What do you want to keep from the characters? You've got to have it all kind of planned out a little bit.
And also consider your natural voice, but still use it as a literary device. Don't just think, oh, this is my natural voice and this is what I'm stuck with. No, use it. Use it to your best. Like, I think the one thing that I want you to walk away with from this conversation is that point of view isn't just let me choose first or third. It is, what do I want to do with this book, and which voice, point of view lends to be able to do that better. Or, okay, I write in first person point of view. That's my natural voice. How can I write first person to the best of its literary devices, or third person if that's your choice.
Okay, well, perfect. There you have it. So thank you for tuning in, listening as you do every single week. Very much appreciated. And that is going to do it for this episode. So, point of view, something we all have, something we're all going to use. And sometimes we have to practice at it because there are different points of view that we're not so good at just yet. But we'll get there. We'll get there. And we'll get there together. All right. Very good. Well, thank you again for listening. Thank you, my dear, for joining me, as always.
Yeah.
And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. We really hope that you're enjoying every bit of it, but we would love to hear your feedback. Drop us an email either to matt@writeoutloudpod.com or Christina@bookmatchmaker.com. We would love to hear your thoughts. What's working, what's not working, and what do you want to hear more of? Thanks so much. We really appreciate it.